Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Your Dose, where we speak to individuals with lived mental health experiences to help people feel less alone and more connected. Today we are speaking to Mel, who shares her personal journey with both an eating disorder and bipolar disorder. She opens up about her diagnosis with anorexia at the age of around 12, as well as her first severe manic episode during her late teenage years, which eventually led her to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Mel bravely discusses the impact of her manic episodes, including engaging in reckless behaviour, feelings of isolation, severe dissociation, and experiencing suicidal ideation. However, it is inspiring to note that Mel has not experienced a manic episode for nearly 10 years and has found stability and happiness in her life, alongside her husband and 2 children. She generously shares her journey for managing bipolar disorder through a combination of treatment and lifestyle changes, highlighting the importance of finding effective strategies for maintaining mental well-being. Thank you so much for listening to the show today. I really hope you enjoy it, and please do remember to like and subscribe. Hi, Mel.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Where are you based?
In Toronto, Canada.
Nice. Wow. Canada looks amazing. How long have you been there all your life, or have you
Yes.
ever lived anywhere else?
No, in my entire life. Yeah.
And do you like living in Canada?
I do. I love this city, so
Yeah.
yeah, you know what, I'm partial to cities. I like getting away, but I like being in the middle of all the action.
But there's plenty of nature around Canada, isn't there?
There is.
Plenty of areas to escape from the city
Yep.
if you do need to.
Yes. Yeah.
Amazing. And you're also a mum.
I am. Yeah.
And 2 children?
2. My eldest is going to be 21 next week.
Wow.
And my son will be 15. Yeah.
How is it being a mum? 2 boys.
It's a journey.
Yeah.
It's a journey, yes. Every stage, you experience new things. Now that my daughter is an adult, it's a different relationship. And I love it because I can relate to her as an adult.
Yeah.
And with my son, it's different. I find that he still needs me, but in a different way. So
Yeah.
it's more so that I've become a guide.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
get that. Me and my mum have a very similar relationship, probably to you and your daughter. She's literally my best friend. And my brother needs, a different kind of love.
Yes.
But we always need our mums.
Yeah.
So
Well,
always.
I hope so.
Always. Always. So thank you for sharing a little bit more about you. I think that's really helpful. And thank you for coming on here today and being brave enough to share a little bit more about your experience with mental health. I think it would be good to start by asking you what exactly is your mental health journey and what it is that you suffer with in terms of mental health.
Okay, so I'm diagnosed with bipolar 1 and anxiety. Usually that kind of goes hand in hand, I find. I also was diagnosed with an eating disorder when I was younger, so with anorexia. Currently, I would say that I'm really stable. I have like minor blips, but for the past 8 years, um, I've found medications that work really well. I find a lifestyle that works really well for me. And I think the biggest driving factor behind all that is that I have kids, um, that I have to be well for.
Yeah.
So, um, excuse me. So yeah, like, um, I do get periods. I do have a tendency to swing higher than lower. I The seasons affect me quite a bit.
Yeah.
Um, so during the winter months, I do really have to make sure I stick with my routine, even when I don't want to. But as soon as the spring comes, I do start to feel a little bit more elevated, which is common with bipolar. So I just have to kind of stick to what I know and watch out for my triggers. Um, and I've done a fairly good job of maintaining
Yeah.
an even keel, so to speak.
So when you talk about triggers, I personally get hugely affected by seasonal affective disorder, which is kind of what you're talking about here,
Yeah.
which is the changes in seasons. Um, so obviously the season changing is a big trigger for you. Is there anything else that you would say is a trigger?
Oh, wow. Having a lot of obligations on my plate or stress. Like if my plate gets full, if I'm in the process of doing something for my kids, um, if I have a lot of deadlines to meet, I start to feel that anxiety and I start to rev up. Like, so usually it's lack of sleep, um,
Yeah,
that really triggers it. Like, if I don't get
yeah,
at least 8 hours,
yeah,
I'm I'm really like, and if it happens a couple nights in a row, it throws me off.
yeah,
Um,
completely. Yeah,
uh, like alcohol will do that as well. Um, Many people have chosen not to drink because it's a huge trigger for them. I think over the last 8 years, um, at first, when I was stabilizing from my last, I would say, severe manic episode, I had cut drinking out altogether. But I will drink on occasion. Um, but I definitely know my limits. Um,
mm. Yeah,
but yeah,
um,
like,
yeah. I think that's quite common amongst in individuals who suffer with bipolars. Sleep and definitely alcohol.
right.
When you just spoke a little bit about your last severe manic episode, would you mind going into that a little bit more and what that would look like? Because I think a lot of people listening to this, bipolar is a really, I feel like quite a misunderstood disorder, and people just assume it's people with, someone that's just got mood swings, or even people think it's split personalities. So I think if you could explain a little bit more about that episode, it would be really helpful for people to understand the disorder a little bit better.
Okay, so my last episode was over 10 years ago. It took me a very long time to stabilize, about 24 months.
Wow.
Um, it was a train wreck. Like, if somebody explained to me um, my story, I I don't know if I would believe it. Um, I can see why people would think that it's a split personality, um, because I did actually become a different person. Like, my behavior was totally um, not reflective of who I really am. Um, so I developed psychosis
Would you
into
mind
it.
would you mind talking a little bit about
Yeah.
the psychosis, because I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand either.
Okay. So, at the start, um, I was hypomanic. Felt great, was getting a lot done, was quite active, was involved with the kids' school, and then it kept escalating. And basically, my hypomania goes 0 to 100, um, meaning that I go hypomanic and then manic within a short period of time. So
Mm,
usually it's about 2 weeks.
mm,
Um, Mania brings on a lot of anger for me, impaired judgment. Like when I'm manic, I will smoke. I don't
yeah,
smoke, just like really odd behaviors. I'm not a drinker. I've never been like an like a drinker that
yeah,
like I said, it's occasionally and it's a very social. And I will drink a ton. So, here I am,
yeah,
manic,
yeah,
drinking,
yeah,
and basically heading into this spiral.
yeah.
Um, so when I say that I made decisions that I would never have made, I left home. I
Wow.
literally left home. Um,
And where did you go?
so at first I was staying at someone's place that was a support,
Yeah,
um, but that became very uncomfortable.
yeah,
Um, I would not stay at my parents' place because it did not feel like a safe place, now or when I was a child. Um, and so for some of that time, I ended up then going to a hotel.
wow. And you were just being
Yeah.
this pattern of destructive behavior
Oh,
and
yeah.
whilst in the hotels.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned like then an interesting point about your parents and the fact that they never felt like a safe space, not even when you were younger. Could you kind of expand on that a little bit and why they didn't feel safe at home?
So I lived in a generational home. I had at one point my grandmother, and then my parents living with us. Um, so there was a lot of different schools of thought on how to raise a child, of how a child should behave. Um, I had a probably a complicated upbringing. There was a lot. Um, I developed acute asthma. I had surgeries starting when I was almost 8, and basically every couple of years after that. Um, and I kind of always felt different. It was really hard to fit in. My parents, like I'm of a mixed race. So I never quite fit in with my mom's side of the family, and I didn't quite fit in with my dad's side of the family. I just, so I felt different. Um, and Yeah, like it was just a very um
Yeah,
unusual upbringing. Like my grandmother, so I became my grandmother's confidant. She only spoke Italian, so I learned how to speak Italian fluently. Um, and I was put in situations where a child, shouldn't be hearing certain stories, shouldn't be involved in. Um, so
yeah.
it was
It was different.
difficult.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um,
definitely. I can't imagine how that must have felt. And it's quite interesting because you mentioned about having an eating disorder at a young age, which is something that I experienced as well, specifically anorexia. How did your parents deal with that? What was the support, if any, that you received from them? And what was that journey with anorexia? Because I know from my experience being anorexic at at a young age when you're a teenager, you're becoming your body's changing. There's all the hormones involved. It's a very very difficult time, but then even more so difficult when you haven't really got a support system around you.
right.
So do you remember a little bit about that and how you were able to get the support?
So the support. Okay, so Um, there was always an issue with food and control since I was a child, like a young child.
Yeah.
Um, there was medication that I was on. to control my asthma, which we found out in the 90s that certain steroids made children very hyperactive and suppressed appetite. So there was always this constant conflict. And my family, their love language is food. And so I was constantly being pushed to eat. And
Oh,
I just didn't have an appetite. And it wasn't because I was actively trying to control that, it was because I just didn't feel hungry.
yeah,
Um, and then I started competing in gymnastics. And I did write piece, a brief piece on it, and I had it posted to Instagram. And we were weighed in at that time, and I was never told to lose weight, but I was told not to gain. And a lot of the girls on the team, a lot of the older girls on the team would always be talking. Like it was constant diet culture, constant, like, this is what I've done. Um, and I was also told, which is a load of crap now, that the tinier you are, the more agile you are, and you'll be able to execute certain moves a
yeah,
lot easier.
that's
I
not
don't
true.
know where that theory came from, because now if you look at gymnasts, and to me they're powerful.
They're muscular and
Oh
strong,
yeah,
and that's how
yeah,
they should be, right? It's just
right,
it's especially when you're doing these strong movements. But you do hear um, massively. I mean, my I did research at university on eating disorders and dancing and gymnastics. It's just ridiculous how many people that go into that at a young age develop an eating disorder, like you said, because from a young age you're being criticized for your weight,
right.
and it's not a case of lose weight, but it's a case of don't gain weight. So then you've got the home issues as well. So um I get like, how did that escalate? Obviously,
Um, so from that point, I mean, I was, how old was I? 11. I ended up having a traumatic accident um, on the uneven bars, which ended any sort of future with gymnastics. Um, I had to have surgery to correct it, and the initial surgeon was negligent. And so, because of that, I had to have two more surgeries to correct his negligence. Um, and I would say that that was probably the trigger to my first depressive episode.
yeah.
Yeah. So I, like I said, eating was always this challenge.
Mm,
But then gymnastics got taken from me, and I really liked gymnastics. I loved it. And I used it as a stress relief, and I was validated by my coach, and I was validated by the other girls in the group. And then all of a sudden, this was taken away.
mm,
Um, and then to add to that, I had to go through surgery, recover.
mm,
Um, and during that time, the doctor basically told me that my pain that I was experiencing was in my head. So, as a kid, being 11 and knowing that you're in pain and having nightmares,
mm.
um, and reliving the accidents, um, it hits differently. It really does. And my parents and pediatrician obviously thought, okay, well, the surgeon's right. You know, there wasn't questioning like the surgeon. So for a long time, I was left in this chronic state of pain, um, and not eating
Wow.
because I was uncomfortable. Um, and at the time, too, I was being given meds to control this pain that was supposed to be in my head. It was bizarre. It was
So
bizarre.
actually didn't ever plan to, well, I mean, nobody plans for an eating disorder, but it was never the initial, I want to be skinny, I want to look a certain way. It was actually something that had snowballed from this accident, then the whole eating issues at home, and then naturally, I guess, am I right in saying that food became a fear? Probably because you were trying to resist it because of how much it had been forced on you when you were
Yeah,
younger, and also you were depressed and everything else, and altogether that led to the anorexia. Do you think that?
yes, I that's part of it, but my it was tough. Like it was my home growing up was very body image focused. Um,
Okay.
so my grandmother and my mother, would talk about how family members look, how they've gained weight or they've lost weight, and how they look,
Yeah.
with the added weight, or how
Yeah.
great they looked now that they've lost. Um, my, my mom was always, um, I'm not going to use the word fit. She was naturally thin, and she modeled. She modeled
Okay.
for a few years, and there was always talk like she's like I could eat whatever I want and not gain weight, and it was just this whole thing. Like, so I kind of admired that about her, and like I liked looking through her pictures, um,
Yeah.
and I was proud of her. But I didn't realize just how much I internalized that type of dialogue.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so you know
Yeah.
it just it was always there, like and when I'm sharing my story with friends and through writing, it was like I was a perfect storm,
Mm.
basically. um there's the genetic component, there's you know an environmental aspect of what can trigger bipolar, but it it just seems fitting that I would be diagnosed with something like this. um
So, so you say that. So um that's really interesting. So you had an eating disorder at what age do you think you had the eating disorder?
Um, I started, my pediatrician started making comments, like I wasn't gaining weight. I was always very petite. We always had like meal supplements in the house. So if I wasn't eating, I could have a shake, and they tasted good. So I was just okay. I was reluctant to doing that. Um, but yeah, I would say that high school was,
How's
yeah,
okay? So that was the first experience of of a mental health issue.
yeah.
Um, when did the bipolar start to um like the symptoms start to show? What
Um,
age would you say that was?
17, 17.
And do you remember what those first symptoms were?
So I was, like, I look back and I'm not really sure how I functioned, but I, what it looked like I was very productive. So I would say that my first experiences with it were more of a hypomanic state.
Hmm.
Um, However, I had a few surgeries prior to 17 that caused depression and dissociation. Um, so, but around the age of 17, I was working. I was, doing a full high school course load. I had an active social life.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, like it looked all so productive. So here in Canada, well, specifically in Ontario, we had grade 13, um, which is now gone. So, like, my grade 12 and 13 year looked great. My marks were high. I was getting a lot done. Um, I was busy. I was angry though. There were parts of me that were very angry. And again, like I had a hard time finding my people. I just
Yeah.
always felt like I was off.
Yeah, because it's interesting when you're talking about hypomania, and obviously, where you're explaining that right now, it sounds, you're productive, you've got loads going on, on the outset that looks like you're just a high achiever.
Right.
So what were the negative symptoms? Was it the fact of the hypomania, or was it the fact that you were almost working too much, that you were burnt out? What?
I think so. My entire grade 13th year, I was hypomanic. I had organized a trip for friends of mine, you know, for 2 weeks. So, like, I mean, we were doing the year end trip or the university end trip, or not, sorry, not university, high school. Um, and, I was partying a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, during that time, MDMA, ecstasy, it was huge. Do I
Yeah.
think that had to do with the trigger? Yes. Um, there were like grade 13 was interesting. I mean, I made honor roll. I worked almost full time. I had a boyfriend at the time, and I was, I had friends. Literally after my commencement, my graduation, I fell into depression. Um,
And
my, sorry,
yeah, no,
like
no, go.
my entire state of being just shut down. Like I started becoming dissociated, and saying there's something wrong. Um, and literally for 9 months, I was in a depressive psychosis. Like
Can you, yeah, can you explain a little bit more about what depressive psychosis is?
so I would say that it was more terrifying than manic psychosis, in my experience. Um, I felt like an imposter. So basically, I felt like the world had changed and I
Mm.
was still the same. Um, I didn't understand anything, like nothing made sense to me. If I watched a if I watched an old movie, I could understand it. But anything new, any new music that came out, any new movies that came out, just I didn't get it. Um, so, you know, I the sound of the phone ringing irritated me. Um, certain sounds irritated me. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I ended up literally staying in my room for nine
Wow.
months. Um, I never heard voices or I never had any oratory hallucinations or visual hallucinations, but I would continue to ask myself, like I was in my head and I'd be like, what is happening? Um,
Mm.
I had a lot of suicidal ideation,
Okay.
a ton. Um,
And you were on your own,
I
or were
was,
you living with someone at this particular time who was
I was in my family home still. So
okay,
I was 18.
okay, and did you tell your parents must have known about what was going on. You were sat in your room for 9 months.
Yes. So they
Um,
knew.
and did they do anything about it? Did they try and
They
support you?
so they tried. I think they tried the best they could. I was misdiagnosed. Like I had always seen kind of like child psychotherapist. My parents had decided that I should see a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist that they had chosen for me was not just a psychiatrist, but a Catholic priest as well. Um, Not a mood specialist, not a pediatric psychiatrist. Um, and he he basically said that I'm depressed and I have anxiety and that I experienced a little bit of trauma from my childhood. And then the bulk of the trauma was from an accident I had. Basically, it was a joke.
Mm,
And to appease my parents, I went to see him. Um, so, you know, their level of help was not the type of help that I needed.
mm,
Um,
yeah.
and like I said too, you go back and you do research, and I started to learn about it as an adult, and there were red flags everywhere, like in terms of being able to diagnose a child. Like, I mean, bipolar was quite new, or not new, but there was little known about it. Um,
Yeah.
and so the psychiatrist not being um, a mood specialist or a pediatric psychiatrist would never have seen or
Mm,
never have picked up on the red flags.
yeah.
Um,
So,
so
so carry on.
so with in terms of my parents trying to support me, they were there. Um, they tried to get me hospitalized. However, the the team that was there said if you're able to manage with her at home, she is probably better there. She may get worse in the hospital. I wasn't um, I wasn't acting in any sort of aggressive manner. I just didn't talk. I was non-communicative. I was numb. Um, and so they said, like if it's in their capacity to care for me at home, it would be much better. Um,
Okay. So that was for nearly a year that
mhm.
you was in this depressive episode. What was it that got you out of that depressive episode?
So my parents had taken us on vacation, um, and I believe it was for 2 weeks. And during that time on vacation, I love being outside. I've always loved being outside. So I started swimming. I started becoming active. Um, and I started to lose the weight that I had gained
Yeah.
over the, the time I was depressed. And it started falling off quickly. So when we got back from vacation, I started walking. So my walks went from an hour to 2 hours to the entire day almost. Like I could walk from where I live um, to the city and back. Um, and then it turned into bike riding and rollerblading. And I just was out of the house and needed to be active. Um, so everybody was like, oh, wow, look at you. Like, I had comments from my grandmother that, I'm looking better. And again, it's all about weight. Like in my head, I wasn't. It was basically how I looked.
Yeah.
If anything, if they, like I said, if I had been diagnosed and they were watching for bipolar, they would have realized if I had known anything about it, I was on an upswing. So um, the exercise started triggering like hypomanic behavior. Um,
Okay.
and again, literally, I went from not doing anything to doing everything in a very short amount of time. So, yeah,
And how long do these hypomanic phases, obviously some of them last for, as you've said, like 2 years, but like typically um throughout your diagnosis with bipolar, what is like this, what is a typical or average amount of time that you will have go through each episode?
I would say the mania was months. So my first manic experience, um, after that 9-month depressive episode, I would say lasted about 6 months.
Wow.
And it quickly, what, like, after every manic episode, there is a crash. And I crash hard. Like, there is no soft landing or like a progressive soft land. It's like I hit the ground and shatter.
And what would that look like
Um,
in terms of
so,
behaviors?
um, so again, very talkative. So I was young with the first um, manic episode. Um, I was The depressive episode went from 18 to 19, and then 19 um, to 20 was my mania. And
Mm,
basically very talkative,
yeah.
huge sense of self. I could do everything. My ideas were um, amazing. I thought that they were achievable. All I
Mm,
wanted to do was be out. Um, my form of addiction during that time was shopping. It's always,
yeah.
shopping has always been an issue for me, not only as a symptom, but, I was taught, from a young age, if you're happy, let's go shopping. If you're sad, let's go shopping. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
that, so it fed into that. So that was my addiction. Um, you know, um,
So you would go on these, like in these mania periods, you go on these huge spending sprees with money that
mhm.
you don't even have.
So at that time, I didn't have a credit card, but what I was doing was going into my parents' bank account.
Wow. So you
Yeah,
were really reckless behavior to
really, really reckless.
this this addiction. And what did your parents do when they found out that you were going into their bank account?
So during that time, I was still depressed. Like I was kind of on an upswing. Um,
Mm,
I was still quite depressed. And honestly, I think I was doing it just to see if I could get a reaction because so much of the world wasn't making sense to me. Um, I had long hair and I literally cut it off. Like I had a short pixie cut after.
mm,
Um, but yeah, my parents kind of were like, we can get authorities involved. And I said, okay. Like I was just like, okay, get authorities involved. Like, I was trying to see what was going to happen.
mm.
Um, because I felt nothing. Like I felt numb. Um, and then as the mania progressed, um, I mean, I didn't have access to unlimited money. And like I said, I didn't have a credit card at the time, but my grandparents were very willing to feed it.
Right.
Um,
Without knowing that this
yeah,
was essentially feeding an addiction,
yeah,
that they would have wanted to see you out of that period of your life where you were depressed, and they probably thought, well, if this makes her happy, then
yes,
let's keep giving her money because we know that shopping makes her happy. So then it's
right,
just a vicious cycle, isn't it?
right.
Wow. So this was in your younger, sort of like late, teenage years, then into young adulthood. What's been the journey after that? So,
No. So, I mean, at, it was a combination of things. My mother had put me on a waiting list for an eating disorder program. And it so happened to be the psychiatrist that headed off um, that program was also a mood specialist. And um, when my first meeting with her was um, while I was still very depressed and in a psychosis, and I had put on weight. So,
mm,
my mother was present. She had explained the weight fluctuation. She explained that, you know,
mm,
I had gone down to 86 pounds
mm,
at one point. Um,
wow.
And now the weight gain that the doctor was seeing was, it happened during this depressive stage. So literally that psychiatrist saw me go from depression to mania within 8 weeks, and a ton of weight fell off. So because I was at an age where I didn't have to have my mom present anymore, I was treated as an adult. Um, that's when I started getting help, more so the help I needed. I started staying consistent. You know, what my doctors were saying to me made a lot more sense. The psychiatrist my parents had me seeing told them that he didn't think that I was bipolar. He didn't think that I was bipolar. He didn't think that the diagnosis was correct, um, which I found interesting. You
So
know,
what was it that he thought that you had then, if you didn't think that you
honestly,
were?
I don't know what he thought. He was friends with my parents. I don't think that much of our conversations were ever kept confidential. Um,
Mm,
my mom liked to know what was going on. She kind of inserted herself into certain situations. The type of relationship I have with my parents is quite strained now. I would almost say that there is no relationship. Um, but yeah, like so
um,
I think the type of help that I found for myself um, as a young adult really kind of put me on my
yeah,
path. Yeah,
amazing. And
yeah.
what is it that you do now to manage bipolar? And also, I guess, I mean, I know that I would say that I'm fully recovered from my eating disorder. I still struggle with periods of my life when things are hard and I'm stressed. I find that it's a sense of control for me to go back to exercise and food, because it is ultimately a control thing, isn't it? In eating disorder. And it's so yeah, I guess the question is, when you are struggling, how do you manage both the bipolar and, I guess, also to an extent, that
The eating disorder.
disorder as well, which I don't believe ever leaves you.
I fully agree. I I think that the eating disorder for me is a comfortable state, and
Yeah.
um, it's always there. It's always been there. Um, I suffered with postpartum depression.
Right, okay.
Um, so during that time, it was a struggle to eat. Um,
Mm,
Anytime I had little blips in my mood, um, it became a struggle to eat. If I had any heightened or elevated mood, I just wouldn't feel like eating. I was just
mm,
busy. When I was, if I experienced a sadder mood, um, I would eat, but then I would feel guilty. So
mm.
it's like the feelings are still there. Like it's a constant readjustment of thought patterns,
Yeah,
um, and
yeah,
just trying to stay focused and trying not to let you know food become the enemy. Um, Exercise
yeah,
as well was a huge thing for me.
yeah.
If I do too much exercise, it can trigger a manic episode. Um,
Okay.
so I've had to learn how to find activity in other ways. I love practicing yoga, um, Pilates. I do a lot of walking. I used to run, but my knees hurt. And over the pandemic, we got a Peloton, which I love. But again, I really have to watch my level of activity.
Yeah, yeah, I get that.
Um,
And in terms of life now, you've said that you've not had a depressive episode for, what was it, 8 years? Is that right?
Um, yeah, yeah, it's been 8 years. I do have flat,
Period.
yes, I have flat periods. Um,
Okay.
and those are difficult too for me because then there's nothing really going on. And I'm not, like, I would say that the last 8 years of my life, you know, I appreciate it. And there it's been consistent, and I've been happy, and I've been present with my kids and my husband. Um, but yeah, like I have had elevated. I've had a hypomanic episode, but
Mm,
again, I literally messaged. I was able to email my psychiatrist, and I said, "This is what's happening," and we adjusted some meds, and it came under control fairly quickly. Um, but like I said, there's always a crash. There's the
yeah.
mania, and there's always a crash. So I did experience a bit of a low period, but like I said, because I had gotten on top of it so quickly, um, they was able to be stabilized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, your story is absolutely amazing. I could literally talk to you all day. I think that you're an absolute inspiration, and it's amazing that you've got a perfectly normal, whatever normal is, because normal doesn't exist,
Yeah. No.
life now. And but you're able to function. You've got a family, and you're proof that it can get better. So I guess for like one of the final questions is, if there is somebody listening to this right now that is struggling with um whatever it is, maybe a very similar experience to what you've been talking about today, what is the advice that you would give them?
That's a great question. It's a lot of so for me it was a lot of trial and error. I
Mhm.
think that accepting your diagnosis and working from there um, is a great place to start,
Yeah.
which means, which meant for me being consistent with my medication, um,
Mm.
completely cutting out certain substances from my life for a long period of time in
Yeah.
order to manage um, bipolar. Um, my lifestyle had to change, um, but really also advocating for yourself and
Mm.
advocating and trying to find a support group of people that can either empathize or that know exactly what you're going through. Because, as a teenager, I literally thought I had lost my mind.
Yeah.
Um,
I,
and
I think, yeah, it's
it,
so true.
it was tough. Like my life, bipolar profoundly changed my life. I've had to grieve the life that I thought I would have. I, you know, I had, I've, I, yeah. So I think the acceptance of the condition of the diagnosis is key. Um,
Hmm.
and then slowly, like, because it's not fast, and slowly advocating for yourself and, you know, trying to figure out what works for you. And
Yeah.
that medication, um, if you need to take it, then you need to take it. Like, I mean, there's no harm, there's no shame in taking it, there's no shame in talking to people about it, um,
Yeah.
or having a dialogue and actually being loud about it because this is how you get help. Um,
Yeah. I think I think one point that you mentioned now, which is so important, and this is what this whole podcast and dose community about is making people feel is making yourself feel less alone and heard and seen, because you exactly what you said about feeling crazy, is exactly how I felt every time I've had some sort of mental health experience. And it's so easy to assume that you are the only person that is experiencing all of these symptoms. And especially when it's a symptom that you're not used to or you have never had before, like dissociation, and it's so scary. So to be able to share your experience and share your story, and then also see that other people are having the exact same thing, I think is one of the most amazing things about Instagram and podcasts. Is something that when I was younger, and probably when you were also younger and had these mental health issues, none of this was available. And I think this is going to completely change, hopefully, mental health, and reduce stigmatization, and ultimately make people um, understand themselves more and not think that they're an absolute they're going absolutely crazy for experiencing these things. And
Right.
actually, these are all completely normal responses to often adverse events in our life.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, and also understanding there might be someone listening to this right now that maybe has some of the symptoms that you have, and could actually lead them to go and get some support and maybe get the diagnosis of bipolar that they've been thinking that they might have for years. And,
Right.
and this could be the thing that pushes them. So before we wrap up, I believe that you also have an Instagram,
I do.
where you share some of your experience. So, what is the name of that Instagram for everyone listening right now, so that they can go and give it a follow? And yeah, and I know that you share some amazing stuff around bipolar and eating disorders and your experience.
So it's mindful movement for mania. Um, and between each word, there's an underscore.
Amazing. And when did you set up this account?
It'll be almost a year. I mean, like I had a personal account. I don't like having many accounts open. I don't have another personal account other than this. But yeah, it was about a year ago when I started, um, when I changed my platform, Um,
And have
I'll, sorry.
you go? No, no, sorry, go on.
So I'll post personal things, pictures. Some of my kids and my husband are private. So, I will put snippets of my current life in there, but most of it is of my experience, my past experience with my diagnosis, and sarcasm, a little bit of humor.
Amazing. And have you found that having that community has helped
I
with
have.
your, yeah,
Yeah, I have. I feel less alone, and also bringing up um, the 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 symptoms people people with bipolar, living with bipolar experience, that I would never bring up, like hypersexuality, um,
mm,
you know, substance abuse. Like it's it's interesting. Um, because those were things that I was always nervous to talk about. And
yeah,
there have been some great writers, and researchers that have explained it perfectly.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so yes,
absolutely.
I find that it helps. I've kind of, disposed of a lot of the garbage that made me feel like my life could never be, something that, um, I could be proud of. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, I would say that it's it's very encouraging, and it's nice to get some feedback as well.
yeah,
But it's also
ab-
nice to like have family and friends recognize, and
mm,
learn about what's been happening.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Because I think um they can only know and do so much and only
yeah,
understand so much. But I think sometimes reading things and listening to things can be really helpful, because not everybody will understand mental health.
no,
And we can't assume that everyone will understand mental health. which is why conversations like this are so important, for people to really start to understand exactly what these disorders are and how awful they can be, and how, they can literally completely change your life. Like you said, you look back and grieve the life that you could have had because of bipolar, but equally, I guess it makes you who you are. It makes you a stronger, more resilient, and for me, most importantly, it makes you a much more empathetic person, because you can really, when you've been in that really low place, you'll never want anyone to experience that again.
Hmm. Yeah, 100%.
Well, thank you so, so much for being on this podcast. You're absolutely amazing. I've loved listening to your story. Honestly, I think you're such an inspiration, and you are proof that even in the darkest moments, you can find light and you can get better. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome.
Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to the episode today. I hope this episode has resonated with you and offered insights, comfort, and most importantly, the knowledge that you are not alone. Remember, your mental health journey is unique, just like you are. It's okay to have good days and bad days, and it's okay to seek help and support when you need it. You are strong, resilient, and capable of navigating life's challenges. If you found value in today's episode, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing this podcast with someone who might benefit from it. And if you'd like to hear more about specific topics or have any questions, please leave a comment below. We're here to support and empower each other. Together, we can break the stigma surrounding mental health and create a more compassionate and understanding world. If you haven't already, please do check out our Facebook community group, which is a non-judgmental space for you guys to share your stories, experiences, and support each other. As we close the episode, please do remember to take a moment for some self-care, whether it's a deep breath, a walk in nature, or a simple act of kindness to yourself. Remember to nurture your mental well-being after these conversations. Thank you so much for being part of our community. I appreciate you all so, so much. And also, if you are listening and feel like you could have a story to share, please do drop me a Instagram message, email me at info@vitamindose.co, or you can also go to the website and fill in a form at www.vitamindose.co. Thank you so much, and I will see you next week.